Hey, what's up guys, Garden here, coming to you guys with a new video today, coming to you guys with a Hexaorb Sorceress deck profile. So yeah, we finally got there, Hexaorb is here, and yeah, this deck's actually pretty fun. I know it's a bit underwhelming in terms of what other decks are doing at the moment, but this deck can actually have a pretty high power ceiling in terms of what it can reach. But in terms of resource management and its lowest point in the deck, it can be quite tough if you don't see, things like your triggers and stuff like that. But yeah, overall the deck is pretty fun to use, and Hexaor's power skill not being once per turn is also pretty fun. Now I'll give some caution, there is some construction going on outside and I can't really help that, so apologies if you guys hear any background noise or anything. But without further ado, let's get stuck into the deck profile and we'll go through the right deck. So, for the starter, of course, we are playing our Tri Connect Sorceress and have the foil versions of the ride line, since this was a ride line that came out of the main set. So that is what we have here. We have the foil version of Tri Connect Sorceress, really, really nice. So for the grade 1, we are going to be going into our T-Square Sorceress. So her ability says that when Pentagleam Sorceress rides on her, you can counterblast 1 and draw a card. So one major thing to bear in mind with her is that you do need a CB, which means in the early game, you want to try not call rear guards in the early game because you don't want to give the opponent the opportunity to attack into them and deny you that counterblast so that you don't get the draw. The draw is important because you want to be drawing as much as you can and have increased chances essentially to see extra copies of your Hexaorb Sorceress, just so that you can get the Persona Ride-Off for her ability. So, little detail there, but it is important to know. And then we're going to be playing the Grade 2, which is Pentagleam Sorceress, of course in the foil. And yeah, her skill is when this unit is rolled upon by Hexaorb Sorceress, you look at 3 cards from the top of your deck, you put them on the top of the deck in any order. So you basically just rearrange the top 3. You do get a look. But yeah, this is really good for stacking your deck, of course, and lining up your triggers with Hexaorb's ability, which we will go into now. So, the grade 3 of the deck, the main grade 3, Hexaorb Sorceress. So, Vanguard Circle. When your drive check reveals a trigger unit, choose one of your rear guards and it gets 10,000 power. So you're basically getting 2 allocations of 10k power there, one from the trigger and one from Hexaorb. And like I said earlier, this ability is not once per turn, which means if you see multiples, you do get to use that ability twice, and more if you get like, really lucky with like the triple drive that Hexaorb can create. So of course her second skill is Vanguard once per turn. If you Persona Road this turn, you compare the cost of Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, reveal up to 1 critical trigger or front trigger from your hand, and put it to the top of your deck, and then this unit gets drive +1 until the end of turn. So you do get that card back that you put on the top, so you're not losing anything, and you do get the normal twin drive. You're essentially just putting the trigger there so you can guarantee the effects of it, and also the effect of the power increase from Hexaorb Sorceress. So yeah, you do want to be Persona-rising Faucet in this deck. The power increase from the Persona, of course, will help really well as well. But also do bear in mind that that is an axe skill, so you don't have to use it immediately. You can do the Persona Ride, maybe call some cards to set up maybe, and then stack the card on top of the deck, so that could be something to look into there. So that is the right deck, of course, for Hexaorb, and we'll move into the main deck here. So, of course, we need to be Persona Riding, so we are going to be playing the 3 additional copies of Hexaorb Sorceress so that we can pretty much get that off as consistent as we can, so don't really need to explain why we're doing that, so that is that. Next, for the other grade 3s, we are playing the 4 copies of Lepisto. Now, for most decks of Hexaorb, I've seen different lineups with like 3 and 4 of this. Now, after playtesting that I've done personally, I feel much more comfortable having this at 4. Lepisto is basically just like your biggest pusher in terms of pressuring the opponent. So her skill is that whilst in rear, when your drive check reveals a trigger unit, you can counterblast 2 and then stand this unit and get 5,000 power. So she restands it at 18k, but then also because you got the trigger, you can get an extra 10k power from the trigger, 10k from the Hexaorb Sorceress ability, of course. So having her restanding after doing the trigger manipulation is really, really good, and will definitely cause problems for the opponent when it comes to guarding your attacks and basically trying to mathematically calculate how big your attacks are going to get after the drive checks, essentially. So yeah, after playtesting, I was going to go with 3 of this, but there are games where sometimes you'll only see like the 1 copy, and your opponent, if they know what they're doing against this deck, will more than likely go for the Lepisto just so that they can basically turn your turn down by a tad so that it's not as lethal. Since that extra attack does do a lot actually. So yeah. So I went for 4. You can go for 3 if you want to. In this, if there's anything else you'd like to play in the deck, but yeah, I think 4 is just necessary at the moment. And also, even though Lepisto is a Counterblast 2 for that, that is fine because there is literally nothing else in the deck that CBs besides from Lepisto and the Hexaorb Counterblast Soul Blast skill. So you are pretty much devoting all of your resources for Counterblasts into Lepisto and also Hexaorb. So yeah, and then you're planning on working around that as you go through. So next with the grade 3s, we are playing one of the main recharges of the decks for Keta Sanctuary, the 4 Fosado. Really good because the countercharge is nice, but we also have other outlets that allow us to countercharge, which we'll get to later. But the main aspect of the card is the Soul Charge, since Soul Charge is used by a large majority of units that you'll see later on. And also, it does mean that you have more opportunity to use those abilities, like, you know, the Tartine for like stacking the deck, the Painkiller Angel to draw cards and get rid of that rear guard off the field. So yeah, filtering, just stacking, the Soul Charge really does help. But also, the Resist skill, of course, is good in those control matchups where it applies. So yeah, I felt like just going for the 4 Facade just to have a nice healthy package there for resource generation if it is able to hit. So that is it for the grade 3s. So for grade 2s, we are going to be going with the 3 Pentagleam Sorceress. So of course we have the 1 in the right deck. Going with the 3 extra copies because we do want to be stacking that deck. The card, if you put the card that you looked at to the bottom of the deck, she gets 2k power essentially. So put it on the top, doesn't get anything. Put it to the bottom, gets 2k. Not really too much of a difference, but could matter on like a grade 2 turn maybe if you have an 8k booster. But more times than often, you're basically saving these stack abilities for the Hexaorb turn, because the main thing you want to do is to try to get as much value as possible from that plus 10k power skill. And by doing that, you're going to be saving your stacking cards until you get to that point, essentially. Because you want to be using that in combination with Lepisto to pretty much guarantee the trigger so that she can restand. So that's kind of how you want to look at it. So yeah, 3 copies of Pentagleam Sorceress. It's the only grade 2 in the deck that I'm playing, so yeah. The main bodies of your deck are basically going to be the Pentagleam, the Fosado, and also the Lepisto, of course. So these are pretty much like the main bodies that you're going to be having in the front row more times than often. So yeah, so get used to those. So next we have the grade 1s. So just because it's the easiest grade 1 to get out of the way, we of course have our PGs. Thought I'd do these now just because you know, it's pretty standard for most decks to be playing. So of course we're going to be playing those. Next, so this is where the grade 1s are sort of like up to you in terms of what you want to play and the ratios, but I went with these because it made the most sense to me personally. So let's go ahead and get into the grade 1s. So we have 4 copies of Tartine. So Tartine is pretty good for the deck. When this unit is placed on rear, you can pay the cost of Soul Blast and resting this unit to look at 2 cards on the top of the deck. You choose a card from among them to put to the top and put the rest to the bottom. So it is a stacking effect, and this is important for Hexaorb, of course. So you do want to be maximizing this, I think. You could maybe put it to 3, but I think for a card like this, you definitely want to be playing 4 of it, just because it synergizes so well with Hexaorb, and pretty much ups your chance of seeing that trigger to get your restand skill off with the pistol, and just getting that power allocation from Hexaorb. So I do think this is important to have it 4 copies, so I am playing the 4. Next, I decided to go with 3 copies of Painkiller Angel. So the reason I'm just going for 3 of this is that it's not completely necessary in the deck, and it is a Soul Blast, so you do need to be wary of that, because you do have other Soul Blasting skills in here. But like I said, the Fosado will pretty much try help you, give you opportunities to get extra Soul, to use more of your Soul Blasting cards. So the more utility out of them, the better. But yeah, the Painkiller is basically the idea of just trying to dig through the deck and then draw into pieces like the Hexaorb Sorceress for the Persona Ride, and just any other pieces like the Lepisto or anything else that you might see. Because remember, when you stack the top 3 cards with your ride line, you will be able to see them. And if you have Painkiller Angels at that point and the top of the deck isn't looking too great, but you see some pieces that you want, then by all means use the Painkiller Angel and get to them. So that is really, really important. So I think 3 of this is okay. You can bounce around with the ratios of this, but I think 3 is fine. And then next, I decided to go with the idea of going with the 10k booster for the deck. I just really like this card. It just makes your power that much better with cards like Fosado, so that the on-hit has more of a chance to connect. But the main addition to boosters in this deck that I love is the way they work with the Hexaorb Sorceress. Because if you're boosting your Vanguard with a 10k booster, this is going to be 23. So naturally, if they put down like 2 15ks to make it 43,000 for a 2 to pass, the problem with that is that one trigger is essentially a 2 to pass, because if you get a trigger, you can put 10,000 power to the Vanguard, say, and then activate Hexaorb's ability to give another unit to choose one of your reguards and get 10k. So you give that 10k to the booster of Hexaorb, and then that continues over. So that'll be 43. So one trigger actually meets the requirements of a 2 to pass normally in normal circumstances. So they really have to think a bit harder when it comes to guarding, and that's why I like the 10k booster, because it just makes the Vanguard attack that much more threatening. And if you stack the deck beforehand, that could line up pretty well with just getting extra pressure onto the opponent and getting their damage count that much closer to getting to lethal range. So yeah. Also, because I am playing 3 this, you can feel free to call some of these in the early game if you are looking for early game rush. But it's not completely necessary. It really depends on the stage of the game that you're at, because like I said, you don't want to be cooking yourself and losing out on that CB if you're going for the grade 1 ride with your tier square sorceress, so do be wary of that. But you can put this behind the grade 2 ride for your Pentagleam, just so you have like a 20k attack on the grade 2 turn, so you have more of a chance to connect there, since, yeah, that's pretty much the best chance you're going to get in the early game for some early game aggro. But you can call her if you so wish to, depending on the matchup. So that's her. And then finally for the grade 1s, we have 2 copies of Faciata, I think you call her, I'm not too sure. But yeah, this is basically the other alternative way of countercharging in here, and she works really well in the deck. And how it functions. So essentially, the skill is once per turn whilst in rear, when your drive check reveals a trigger unit, you can Soul Blast 2 and Countercharge 1. Now, Soul Blast 2 for a countercharge does sound expensive, but it's actually fine. The reason we do this is because it works in conjunction with Lepisto and stacking a trigger on the deck. So if you stack that trigger on the deck, you know it's coming. So as long as you have the Soul Blast 2 available, you can pay for the cost of Lepisto, even if you only have 1 Counterblast that turn, because it's fine, right? So if you're going to the Hexaorb ride that turn, and you're stacking your deck, as long as you've got the 1 CB available, you can just guarantee that drive check, get the trigger, and then use the Faciata to Soul Blast 2, Countercharge 1, and now you have the 2 Counterblasts available for that Lepisto. So you'll attack with the Lepisto, then do the Vanguard check, the drive check, of course, get the trigger, get the Countercharge, stand the Lepisto, and then you got the workaround there, essentially. So it's for turns where your opponent thinks that you can't do much, because if you do only have 1 CB, more times than often, you're only going to be doing the Hexaorb skill for the Counterblast and Soul Blast. But if you have 2 CB, you can still do the 3 Counterblast player of doing the Persona ride, the cost, and also the Counterblast 2 for Lepisto. So this actually works really well in the deck, and I was thinking about playing the 1, but because it's such a power player, I wanted at least 2 copies of this, just so I could have that opportunity to get that sort of combo off, essentially. So I feel like 2 copies of this is warranted, and I personally think it works really well in the deck. So yeah. So that is it for the sort of main units of the deck. So now we go through the grade 0s and the triggers. So triggers is a little bit different than usual. We're playing the 4 crit, of course, from the main set with Disma. Really, really nice. But after this, we're only playing the 2 copies of the Gurgant crit, because I decided to opt out and put 2 copies of the front trigger in. Now, the reason for this is because crit triggers, although good, front triggers provide really high pressure when your opponent's at 4 or 5 damage, especially. And the cool thing with Hexaorb is that she's able to stack these triggers on the top of the deck, which means as long as you see one type of the trigger, you can have whatever you want. If you want that crit pressure, just as long as you have a crit in hand, you can stack it on the deck and get the crit. If you have the front trigger in hand, you can stack the front, get the front. So it's really, really effective, especially at high damage count for the opponent. And I think 6 and 2 with crits and fronts have been working pretty well so far for me. But if you did want to like increase the crits, then that's also fine. But I do find the front triggers, especially with Lepisto, just work really, really well. Because of course she'll just be getting even more power than usual because the front trigger on top of a Hexaorb skill is just brutal. So yeah, it's really, really powerful, and I definitely do like the 2 and 6 lineup for the trigger ratio there with crits and fronts. Saying that, we are playing draw triggers still, since we do need to be drawing pieces of the deck, so these are still important to play. Want to be seeing your Hexaorbs, your Lepistos, your Facades, just... There's a lot of pieces to the deck, so yeah, like I said, you just want to see them. So draws are still good. Of course, the big draw trigger, pretty much of the deck, so kind of playing 4s, 4 draws, the over trigger. So yeah, of course you want to be playing this, and the over trigger still has a really high effective output in this deck because you do have things like Facade and Lepisto, which are grade 3s, which means these will get twin drives if you do see this as your trigger. And in Hexaorb, this is probably the best trigger that you can potentially see, basically. So yeah, because it just synergizes with the grade 3 count in the deck as well. And then last but not least, we have the grade 0 of the heal trigger. Yeah, because you're going to be playing heals, and yeah, going to be playing the Sorceress heal, because it just goes with the theme, and Hexaorb Sorceress overall. But yeah, that's going to do it for the deck. This is Hexaorb Sorceress. Really enjoy playing this deck. It's very, very fun. It does have a pretty, like, how do I put this? It's a bit of a pendulum effect. Like, sometimes it can just be really bland and you just don't get much off in terms of, like, you know, not seeing your triggers. It can fall flat, but when you do see the triggers and the pieces in the right order and you've got the resources that can back that up, Hexaorb can just explode out of nowhere and the opponent's going to have a really hard time dealing with it. So yeah, I really enjoy Hexaorb. This was the last deck profile for set 1 that I was going to do for the time being. I understand that we have the Festival Collection coming soon with a couple of support cards, but I'm not really looking to updating the decks with those cards, to be fair. Probably just going to wait for set 2 and yeah, get hyped for that instead. So yeah, that's going to do it for the deck profile, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. A little bit longer than usual that I'd like it, but I did want to explain a little bit more in depth of this deck, since there are some technical plays of it that I did want to explain, essentially. But yeah, that's going to do it for me, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and like always, drop a comment down below if you have anything to say. Drop a like on the video if you liked it, and yeah, that's going to do it for me. So like always, guys, this is Guardian 25 signing out.